Right, okay, folks. Welcome back again. Another week, another podcast. Something a little different this week. And before I jump into it and actually introduce the two people that I'm speaking to, I kind of want to speak to why I'm doing changing the format a little bit for this episode. So I don't know when this one's going to go out, but a couple of episodes, either 2 or 3 episodes ago, you'll remember I did the conversation with a guy called David Pickup, who is, well, he calls himself a reparative therapist, but it's really just another name for a gay conversion therapist. And it was one of the most ridiculous conversations I've ever had in my life, and it was very contentious, and it stressed me out. And the aftermath of it, of people emailing me, unhappy with the episode, was stressful. Interestingly, everybody that emailed me and disagreed with my perspective were all people that said, I don't know what I'm talking about. David's right. The science is right. Being gay can be cured. All this nonsense. Funnily enough, not a single gay person emailed me to tell me that they'd had the therapy and that it worked for them. So anyway, I need to start bringing the stress levels of this podcast down a little bit, and I want to start talking to people that not just people who aren't professionals, people like with lived experience and stuff, but people who are sort of casting a positive net out into the world. For all his intentions, I don't think that's what David was doing, and so I'd like to speak to more people doing that. It's uncontroversial. What they're doing is something good. It's something positive, and that's what I've got going on today. So today with me, I've got, two of the biggest mental health and well-being artists on Instagram who've got a combined social media following of more than 300,000, which is ridiculous. My first guest is Hayley Weaver. She is a Seattle, Washington-based artist and illustrator who goes by the name Hayley Drew This on Instagram, and whose website and online print and merchandise store can be found at HayleyDrewThis.com. And it's Hayley, Haley. Bit of an unusual spelling, HayleyDrewThis.com. And my second guest is Kate Allan, who goes by The Latest Kate on Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon. And is also she's also an artist and illustrator and author of You Can Do All Things, Drawings, Affirmations, and Mindfulness to Help with Anxiety and Depression. So, guys, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Hello.
Right, okay. So, well, I didn't actually say what we're talking about today. Might be quite obvious. I'm interested in, well, sort of two things, really. Mainly, I'm interested in the connection between artistic expression and mental health issues, but also the social media aspect of it as well, because social media is sort of, I think I'm the generation above you guys. I'm in my late 30s. I think you guys are mid 20s. So social media to me, I'm just a little bit outside of that generation that gets it. So hopefully you might be able to explain it to me today, some of the virtues of it. So I think a good place to start would be, because you guys are both working in art and specifically within mental health and well-being, would be a sort of a chicken and egg scenario. So, Hayley, if we start with you, what came first, the art or the going loopy like the rest of us?
I think they've kind of always been intertwined. I've had anxiety since I was really little, and I think art has always been the way that I've dealt with that. So I think they've kind of played off of each other. And I guess social media has been a way for me to share that. And I didn't really tell people that I was sharing art about like mental health and my own feelings until a couple months in, because I was so anxious about telling people it was me. But the responses were so positive, and like everyone seems to deal with some form of anxiety or fear or social anxiety, I guess is the best way to describe it. So it's kind of cool to feel less alone in that.
So how far are we going back then for you with the well, let's start with the art. Was that a recent thing, or are we going right back to childhood, or what's the origins of it?
Definitely childhood. My mom did not let us, my siblings and I, watch TV very much. So she would sit us at the kitchen table with this giant bucket of markers and like a ream of computer paper, and we would just be left to draw for hours. So it's kind of always been this hobby of mine. And I took art in school, and I always enjoyed art a lot. I know a lot of people in high school remembered me as like the girl who was always doodling. In fifth grade, I got in trouble for doodling in math too much. So it's always been kind of like a part of my life. But I don't think I realized it was something that I was able to translate into like storytelling until I was out of college.
Right. Okay. And Kate, what about you? What's the genesis of your interest in art?
I feel like you could just copy and paste what she just said, like pretty much line for line. We
Right.
had pretty much the same story of like not getting to watch too much TV. So just having art as a hobby from the very beginning and also having anxiety from the beginning, as well as learning to make comics and do an expression of anxiety and depression kind of after coming into adulthood.
Right. Also, so let's start with that. You both mentioned anxiety there. So, to the extent that you're comfortable talking about it, do you know what the origins of that is or are? Sorry, what it is you the first time you remember being anxious, with it being a not just the first time being anxious, but the first time it being a sort of a thing that starts to take over your life. Start with you, Haley.
Yeah, I mean, I can pinpoint the first time that I remember having like a really socially anxious moment, and it was in kindergarten, and I wouldn't enter the classroom until another student entered with me. So that was kind of the first manifestation of social anxiety in my life, but it has been a very common thread throughout everything. I've always cared a lot about what other people thought of me. I worried a lot about, how I was perceived by others. So I think that's been like the most easy to track part of anxiety, but I've had it like through with school, with sports competitions, with work, with pretty much every aspect of my life. It bleeds somewhere in there.
And to what extent are we talking? Because anxiety is sort of it's a bit of an amorphous term, and it exists on a spectrum, I guess you'd say. Are we talking to the extent that it's become debilitating, or is it more of just a general issue?
Yeah, I guess it kind of depends on the time in my life. When I was little, I was diagnosed with anxiety, a generalized anxiety disorder, but it really does come and go in waves. I think earlier this year, I was actually experiencing panic attacks, but I don't have them on a regular basis. It's really strange. So I don't know if there's really an answer. It kind of depends on where I am in my life and how I'm able to manage it. I think the good thing is like I have the biggest tool belt I've ever had in my life right now, but it's still hard.
Yeah. And Kate, what about you?
Well, I have definitely experienced anxiety since I was little. The story that I usually tell people to explain what that was like is that my parents would take me to the playground, and instead of playing with the other kids, I'd hide under the jungle gym. There wasn't this connection with other people. There was just a lot of fear, basically being in any environment that I wasn't comfortable in. So I would be comfortable basically in my own room or at my grandparents' house. And that was it. Everywhere else, a lot of fear, a lot of panic. And it was panic attacks and stuff were so extreme that sometimes my mom would just have me stay home from school rather than have the fight of trying to get me to go to elementary school. And I wasn't diagnosed until my mid 20s. And so I was hitting milestones a lot later than my peers. I got my driver's license later. I got my first boyfriend later, my degrees later. And so it wasn't until I really started having breakdowns constantly, panic attacks, and extreme suicidal ideation that I finally had to see a doctor because I was having panic attacks at work. And was kind of just spiraling. And so when you aren't able to function like at all, then it's definitely time to try and figure out uh, some sort of relief.
Yeah, it always surprises me when people say that it's something that they've dealt with since, almost as long as they can remember. Because for me, my issues with anxiety, which turned into like agoraphobia, where I just never left the house at all.
Right.
That happened for me when I was, in my my early 30s, and before that I'd been fine. I didn't believe in, anxiety. It's like there's no such thing as anxiety. You're just a pussy, and there's no such thing as
Mhm.
depression. You just be negative, sort of snap out of it. And then the few years that I was going through it at the worst, I don't know. I'm always sort of I'm always in awe of people that have sort of been through that since the beginning, and especially anyone that's been through it through the teenage years, because I imagine that's insane to go through. The level of sort of symptoms that I was going through, to translate that to, to being a teenager is just yeah, I can't imagine really. But one thing I'm interested in is whether both of you guys mentioned getting a diagnosis at some point, and I'm wondering if either of you found that helpful, the diagnosis, or a hindrance.
I definitely found it helpful. For me, it was validation of that all of the things that I had found difficult my entire life weren't just me being bad at human. Like it actually meant that there was something going wrong in my brain. And along um, with being diagnosed, usually comes some sort of treatment plan. I had never heard about something like mindfulness or cognitive behavioral therapy or talking even with other people who had anxiety, because it wasn't something that people in my social circle ever would admit to. Um, all of that came about after being diagnosed.
Yeah,
Haley?
I completely agree. I think the word feel like the idea of being validated is the key there, Kate. And that's how I felt as well. And just knowing that there were so many, number one, tools to deal with that I didn't know about, and also so many other people who had experienced it, and like I could look to, really helped
Absolutely.
us alone. Yeah.
Did either of you have, even though you say it was like it was validating, I'm not sure whether that was the experience for me, a validation. I'd say more than that, was the sort of, I got some sort of like an iatrogenic effect, as they call it. So, and mine was an informal diagnosis. I didn't get, like a prescription or whatever it is with it written on. It was just, my therapist said to me, it sounds like you might have agoraphobia. And so I was like,
Mm.
agoraphobia? I remember that was this weird thing that my dad told me about as a kid, and this idea that people couldn't go outside just struck me as the most ridiculous idea ever. And and but then I went home and researched agoraphobia, and then I sort of discovered all these things attached to it, like depersonalization and visual hallucinations and
Mm.
dizziness and nausea. And then all of a sudden, like magic,
It
these
just clicks.
well, no, these symptoms that I'd never had before, like the nausea, the visual hallucinations, they began to kick in, because it was like, oh, that's what happens with agoraphobia. So this must be.
Oh dear.
So any similar experiences for you, or that just me being a bit of a freak?
I don't think you're a freak. I'm sure I'm sure that having more knowledge about something can make you more aware. I would wonder if you had been experiencing things but kind of pushing it away in your head. That would be my guess.
Oh no, I think for me, I became an expert. I became an expert agoraphobic. That became part of my sort of identity. And actually, it's something that I sort of will address that actually a bit
Mhm.
later on. The idea of this becoming part of your identity. Before we get there, though, let's sort of let's tie this in with what you guys are doing now, and sort of putting the art online, and the social media aspect of it. So was this? Was you doing art anyway on a regular basis, and then the social media was added, or was the emergence of social media a motivation to actually take the art seriously and to start putting your stuff out there?
Hmm.
Anyone?
I think that social media is wonderful for building an audience of people who like the same things as you. Um, because I have always enjoyed drawing for myself, but it wasn't necessarily something that I could find community in where I was, because I draw colorful, sparkly animals. And there's an audience for that online, and they're all wonderful. But I couldn't necessarily present that to friends at school and be like, be part of my colorful animal club. I guess if you're just doing Pokemon fan art or something like that, then sure. So for me, it came to, I enjoyed creating first. It became about mental health specifically when I was really struggling. And so I wanted to just kind of cheer myself up. And then posting it online, I found that there were a lot of other people going through the same things that I was, and that the way that I cheer myself up through arguing my negative thoughts and creating affirmations was actually helpful to other people as well. So social media has allowed me to reach out to other people who, um, again, there's some sort of sense of community and validation from knowing that other sane, very cool people are struggling with the same thoughts as you.
Yeah, Haley, what about you?
For me, I was not drawing or doing anything creatively or regularly at the point that I started my account. And the reason that I actually ended up starting my account was because I felt so creatively stunted. And so it wasn't even like a goal to have this outlet for my anxiety or anything. It was really just try to start being creative again, because I had just graduated college and I felt very stunted and confused, and that very classic I'm lost and have no idea who I am storyline. And so I started posting an image every day. And I mean, you can go back to my first drawings. They are pretty terrible. And I had no idea what my voice was. I was kind of like copying a lot of the bigger artists at the time, like Mari Andrew. And I just had no idea. And it's been a really slow movement towards realizing that the stuff that I really connect with and the stuff that my audience really, that I grew connected with, was stuff dealing with mental health, and specifically anxiety. But it took me a long time to get to the point where I felt comfortable sharing that side of me, especially once people I knew in my real life knew about the account.
Yeah, isn't that an awkward part of it? I didn't tell anybody in my real life that I was drawing about mental health for a couple of years. I didn't want anyone to know.
A strange thing to share with people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why?
Yep.
Well, that's interesting. That's interesting. Why not? Why not share that with the people that you know?
So for me, it was this like, what if I fail feeling. Like, I don't want all of these people to watch from like the comfort of their own couches, me putting my like heart and soul on the line on the internet, and then like getting trolled or getting weird responses. Like, that was a really big fear of mine. So the people I did tell were my close friends and my parents, my siblings, I think, and my grandmother, who was an avid fan from day one. But I never like shared it on my personal Facebook account or Instagram. I never wanted like, I didn't want it to be this thing until I realized that I had traction, which might make me a coward, but I don't know.
I definitely think that making this sort of content is being open to being vulnerable, which can be a very scary thing. It's admitting to having fear and being unsure and struggling with emotions, and even just a person that's very worried, that's not a very attractive thing to other people generally. So me bearing my, all of my struggles online didn't necessarily feel like something that I wanted just regular everyday people to know about me. And
It's like
when,
your
yeah.
journal.
Yeah, exactly. It's like posting your diary online. And it turns out that a lot of people are like, they feel better because of it, because you're being vulnerable. Like, that allows other people to have conversations, because you start with like, I had a hard time making a phone call today. I was too socially anxious, so I just sat next to my phone for an hour before I worked up the courage to do it. And you're going to get a bunch of, I mean, depending on your size of your audience, you're going to get a bunch of comments from people who say, oh, I've been there. And so it's just all of that positive feedback coming constantly that kept me wanting to share, even though it wasn't necessarily something that I wanted real life people. I didn't want to talk about that with my friends in real life, I suppose, because it just felt like too much admitting to weakness.
The actual process of sitting down to do the drawing, you hear people say a lot that, you know, that art helps me with mental health issues, with my anxiety, with my depression or whatever. But it's a very sort of general way of describing it. And I was just wondering if there's a way of specifically describing why sitting down and drawing pictures would help with those things, and also whether it is to some extent connected with the fact that there's an audience out there. Like, would it mean the same to sit down and do the artwork if nobody was watching and nobody cared?
So for me,
sorry.
You go ahead.
Thank you. I think for me, I've always enjoyed drawing because it's sort of like a mindfulness exercise almost, in that it keeps me in the moment. It keeps me grounded, connecting to something that I'm creating. And it's also just really fun to be able to make something out of nothing. Like, I am the creator. I have turned this space on my hard drive into an image. It's wonderful. And then having the audience is just like a wonderful bonus on top of that, of connecting with other people who actually enjoy the stuff that I want to exist. I say, I'm bringing this into the world. Does the world like it? And the world says, yeah.
So it's a form of escapism, I guess.
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
Haley, what about for you?
For me, it's very much like journaling. I think trying to figure out how to illustrate the way that I'm feeling is sort of forcing me to confront what I'm feeling and think about it in a new way, think about how I can kind of reframe that. And that has been one of the single most helpful tools for dealing with my insecurities and fears and anxieties in my entire life. And I've always been an avid journaler. It was really just translating those feelings into images and illustrations. I completely agree with Kate. Having an audience that is, for the most part, super positive and supportive is the most incredible bonus. I shared about having panic attacks pretty recently and just got so many messages of support and, their own experiences. And it just makes you feel so much less alone in it. And so supported. And I know that's not something that everyone gets when they make art, but it definitely makes being vulnerable with it online feel worth it to me.
Absolutely. I agree completely.
Right, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have a crack at this screen sharing business because, for those people watching this on YouTube, it might be a good idea to get a feel for the sort of stuff.
Oh, am I going to be on the video?
Yeah, it's going on YouTube, I'm afraid. Is that okay?
I have my boxes.
Oh, don't worry about that. I've got my scruffy living room and ugly curtains going on behind it.
I'm going to be moving, so I'm keeping all of the boxes that I acquire.
Right, here we go. Let's have a crack at it. I've never actually done this on Hangouts before, so let's see how this goes. So,
cool.
Can we see this?
Yeah. That's my art.
Right, so my first... Is that only... I can't tell if we're... present to everybody. Oh, God, we're doing this on the fly here. Right, so the thing I'm interested in how this sort of... the style emerges. And what the obvious thing with your style, here, Kate, is that it's predominantly animals.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting. I did an interview a few weeks back with a guy that's... Have you heard of furries? The people like to dress up in the costumes and stuff. And we were talking about like anthropomorphization. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Something like that. And how, animals we can use animals to sort of express emotions and stuff. But I'm just wondering why, why animals? Why not humans? Because you're a human, and it's about
Right.
the experience of human emotion. So yeah, why
I mean,
animals?
it's two different things for me. One half of it is that I just always really enjoyed drawing colorful animals. It just does something for my brain. I don't really know what it is. When I'm feeling really, really bad, it's just kind of like just doodle, see what comes up, and then coloring is really fun. So part of it is I just really like it. The other part of it is that since I'm making affirmation artwork, I wanted to make something that people would take like kindly to, that it would be easily digested. And in my experience, when I have drawn humans before and they have some sort of message, people are more likely to say like, oh, I just disagree with you. But it feels weird to disagree with a pink otter. And there are some people that will argue in the descriptions of, in the comments section of my images. But mostly people say like, either, this wasn't intended for me, or they'll be like, oh, thank you, Fox, or something like that. It's usually them thanking the animal and not necessarily thinking of a person who's saying it. And so I've kind of purposefully removed myself from the equation, even though it's my own writing, um, by having animals represent these messages. I think it just comes across to people a little bit better.
And this might be me trying to be too much like of an art critic or something here, but and this might sound like a really pretentious question now. I think I'm trying to be deep here, but are the bright colours of this, are they
Yeah.
sort of a purposeful attempt to sort of, a sort of reaction to what are essentially all dark emotions?
I think it's just something that when I'm feeling depressed or anxious, I just respond well to. Um, I really enjoy bright colors. Going outside, I want to watch every sunset. And so it is sort of just kind of like, this is how I cope with bad days. For some reason, my brain just really loves rainbows. So that's what I'm going to be making, whether or not it really is about mental health. But I think that other people have found a similar enjoyment in it and possibly are more receptive to it because they also enjoy the color schemes. But I don't know. I always think like I'm changing up my color scheme lately. Like I'm using browns and grays and things like that. Oh no, people aren't going to like this one, and then they still have a good response to it. So I don't really know. I just make colorful things because I like it, I guess, is the end of it.
Right, and Hayley, so your style, let's get rid of this. So your style is one thing I'm going to ask you here is whether you've got a sort of a crossover interest with maybe poetry and writing and things, because yours is more a mixture of artwork and words that's going on there as well. So if you just talk us through how you came to this particular style, because it's very distinct.
Sure. So I actually started with just like sketchbooks and the really crappy colored pencils that I could find in my house. I have very little technical art training. I took art in high school, but that was it. So it took me a while to kind of find my style. But I think I've always been a writer first. That was always the thing that I told people I'd be when I grow up, that I was going to be a writer, that I was going to write books. And drawing and illustration was just kind of a hobby. And I never, ever thought it could turn into a way to like express myself more than just getting a fun extracurricular class in high school. So I think the two kind of have melded once I started realizing that it could be a form of self-expression and storytelling. And then once I had been doing the colored pencil versions for a little over a year and a half, I finally bit the bullet and bought an iPad to start doing them digitally, which is why it's a lot more colorful now. But if you scroll really far back, it's all on like, it's really terribly taken iPhone photos of sketchbooks. Here we are. There it is. So it's been quite the journey.
Right. So, right. Let me try and stop this now and see. We bring us back. There we go. There we go. I'm glad that worked. What's different about what you guys are doing to a lot of people on Instagram, people that are doing art for the purposes of feeling better, for helping other people feel better, is your audiences are huge. I'm sure you've probably acclimatized to the size of your audience by now, but I think between that, you've both got something like in the region of 150,000 followers, and if you look at these concerts, like these big festivals like Glastonbury, where there's 100,000 people in that crowd, you guys have had that many plus another 50 have come along, seen your artwork and gone, I like that, I want to see more of it, I'm going to follow it. And firstly, I'm interested in what you do when you start making that sort of traction, because I don't suppose you ever expect to get that big. And then once you do get that big, I'm wondering whether you feel any just tell me what the pressures are that come with it. I haven't got a huge audience. My email is mental for people coming in and negative feedback, people asking me for things, people asking me to help them out, etc. And so I'm imagining for you guys, it's maybe 100,000 times that. So yeah, what's it like having that size of an audience?
I think I've been really fortunate because everybody's pretty nice. I haven't really gotten that much bad feedback. Every once in a while, I'll get somebody that is angry at me for making a generalization. I got some angry messages about saying that mindfulness would be helpful for everybody, and they said absolutely not. But I am in a very fortunate niche corner of the internet where everybody's really sweet. So I feel weird saying that when you've said, like, I've just received a lot of, negative emails and harassment, and I'm just like, oh, too bad for you, because my audience is great. They're always nice.
Well, I guess what I'm doing is sort of it's sort of contentious anyway. We've done done topics like, let's say, with like gay conversion therapy and rape and PTSD and trauma and things like that, which are very sort of contentious issues anyway.
Right.
And so you get a lot of negative feedback.
I stay in my lane of cute animals, and we're just going to talk about how to cope with. You feel bad about yourself, try and be a little nicer to yourself. Maybe that will work. I don't know. That's kind of the feel of my artwork.
Well, what about you, Haley? Because I mean, some of your stuff has got sort of philosophical assumptions attached to some of the artwork, and to me just reads as an opportunity for plenty of people to maybe disagree with you. And so I'm just wondering, what it's like for you on that front.
Honestly, my audience is pretty similar to Kate's. I've had really positive feedback for the most part, and I think part of the reason is because social media, and Instagram specifically, is this place where a lot of people are trying to show how great their lives are. And, it's kind of an exhausting and draining place to be. And I think art that's more vulnerable, and even if it is kind of taking an opinion or, maybe saying something that may be a generalization or something like a little bit more opinionated, it is offering something positive out into the world, and it's
Right.
just like bringing people together. And I think that's kind of a rare thing on social media. I feel like that's why I have found success with that, because it is positive. It's a generally positive space.
What about the other thing I mentioned though, with maybe people inboxing, asking for help, asking for advice? Is that something that happens a lot? And again, if it happens at the scale that you guys are working at, I imagine it's maybe happens quite a lot. Or
I get people asking for advice sometimes, but my usual response is, like, I'm not a qualified therapist, for one thing. This isn't something that I can tell you what the the doctor approved thing to do is, but if I have any experience with the situation myself, I'll tell them what I did, whether that was successful or not. I'll let them know, like, I have tried to cope through this situation by doing this thing, and I found success, like, good luck to you. But kind of letting them know, like, I'm a peer, I'm along the ride with them of dealing with these issues, and I'm not, I wouldn't say that I'm someone to necessarily like look up to as an authority on mental health, because that's part of the vulnerability of it, though. And I think that's one of the reasons why people don't look to me for advice or things like that, because they can tell that I'm just trying to figure it out as I go.
Haley, what about you?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's a lot of people saying, I feel heard. I don't get a lot of people asking for advice from me. And I think it's for the exact reason Kate just said. It's like they don't see me as an authority in it, just someone who they can relate to. And I'll admit it, like my inbox, I have DMs that I have not looked through. It has that little like 99 plus, and it's really
Same,
to me.
same. Yeah.
And I feel so bad because I know there are some that are like real far down there and I'm just never going to see them. So
Yeah.
to all the people listening to this that have one of those sitting there, I'm so sorry. But I mean, it's really overwhelming in a really cool way to know how many people are reaching out, even if it is just to say like, me too.
Right.
I'm interested as well. You've both got a sort of a different, what would you call it? Well, different business model, I guess. So, Kate, you've got Patreon and patrons. I don't think you've got that, have you, Haley? I'm not seeing anything for Patreon.
No, I don't have a Patreon yet.
Right, and so
well, if you want to set one up, just like send me a message and I'll help you out.
Yay!
Be an ambassador.
well, you
Because I
see,
love it.
yeah, the thing I'm interested with there is with that is for Kate especially is once you've got an audience that's actually paying for the content, I'm wondering, is that sort of does that add to the pressure of it? Because like with Haley not being on Patreon, and she's got followers, and there's the the print store, and people can go there and buy things if they like. But with Patreon, I'm on Patreon, and there's people are paying monthly, and you feel like you've got to produce content. I'm wondering if that's there's any sort of pressure there for you. You feel a bit more responsible for your audience, and whether that in any way taints the experience of it's turned the art from something from an expression of self to reach out to people to a responsibility. And I'm asking because for me it has had that effect. I'm wondering whether to scrap the Patreon thing and just do this as and when I feel like it instead. So yeah, I'm interested in your experience of that.
I've heard of that with a lot of creators, honestly, turning your passion or your hobby into a business in general can definitely affect how much you're enjoying it and whether you enjoy it at all. My experience so far has been I will get overworked sometimes because I specifically have goals that I then make public, and then I have to meet those goals, and I'm not always the best at meeting them. But mostly I feel like having patrons is like people cheering me on. It helps me to be more consistent, and they're all just sweethearts. Again, with my audience, I've been very lucky. So everyone I've interacted with on Patreon, anytime I express that I'm having any sort of stress or struggle or difficulty, they're always really sweet about it. There have been a couple of times, for example, where I got like benefits out because I send out physical things. I got benefits out late a couple of times, like when I was in school, like had finals or something. And they're always just really understanding about it. So I think a lot of that pressure, I feel like, is kind of, I put that on myself, and it's not necessarily coming from my audience.
Yeah, sort of similar to my experience is that even though I've got relatively few patrons, it's you get to know these people like by the names and stuff, and they message you, and you build up a sort of rapport with them, and then you just you feel like put out a bit of content that's not quite good enough, and you feel like you're letting them down, or you're not putting the content out often enough, and like they're not getting their money's worth. And yeah, that's what I mean. I'll might as well say I don't think I've ever broke like 25 patrons, and you know you've got something like 500, which again
Guys.
which is
It's kind of mind blowing, honestly. When
Yeah.
I see that number, I'm just like, that. How can that be a thing? How can this many people decide to sign up for this?
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know if I'm on the off chance that the podcast ever reached that sort of level. I don't know if I'm sort of cut out for that. But still, again, Hayley, for you, I'm wondering if regardless of the you know the paid subscriber thing, whether still you know there's 150,000 is crazy. There's 150,000 people there, an audience, and whether you still feel you know a responsibility to them and pressure to keep pumping stuff out, and again whether there's any pressure there that taints the experience at all.
Yeah. Honestly, I take breaks when I don't feel like creating. So, and that's something a little bit more new for me. For the first year, I put something up every day. And the second year, I thought, okay, I don't really need to do that, but I still posted pretty consistently because it was what I was used to. And now I'll go like a week or two without publishing something sometimes. And that's sometimes because I don't have anything I want to say. That's sometimes because I feel tired and maybe my mental health has been taking a really bad downswing, or maybe I'm having like a really nice time and I want to just like not be plugged in all the time. So that's been nice. I think to answer like the pressure question though, I do always want to make sure that the content I'm sharing is stuff that people will like. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to shake that feeling. I'm not good at the idea of like just putting whatever I'm thinking out. Like I don't think I'll ever be that kind of artist, even though I kind of wish I could be that like anarchist.
One thing that was a concern for me doing this podcast was like, okay, I'm gonna do this mental health podcast, and then I'm thinking, but do I want to be the mental health guy? Do I want to? And for a couple of reasons, not so much like the stigma around it or anything like that, but just whether it was too narrow in scope, and whether I wanted to potentially build a career out of something that was ideally only took up a very small period of my life. I didn't this 4 or 5 years that I was going through what I was going through. I sort of worried about defining the rest of my life based on that, and whether sometimes it's just good to just turn your back on the mental health stuff and not be so wrapped up in it. I don't know if I formulated a question there, but whether
I identify with that, in that we're creative people, and sometimes you think like, I want to be open to having other projects going on, and having this sort of mental health art blog established and taking up all of my work day. I'm very fortunate to have it, and there's a part of me that wonders, like, you did always want to do a children's book. When are you going to do that? Like, how are you going to make that happen? But for me, I don't necessarily feel burdened by the fact that I make mental health content. I think because there's still things that I want to say. There's still things that I have gone through that I want to share those experiences. And I'm still just experiencing from day to day the struggles of it. And so for me to have to work through those same fears over and over again, and then like argue against that negativity, that's what fuels me to keep producing artwork week after week. Because having generalized anxiety disorder, even though it might be the same fears on repeat, they don't go away. And so you have to come up with new strategies, I guess, to continue to stay mentally healthy. So I don't necessarily want to box myself in creatively, but I'm still enjoying this project as I'm continuing to do it.
Hayley?
Yeah, I think as long as I'm thinking about anything, I'll enjoy having art as an outlet. And when I say thinking about anything, I guess I mean like having anxiety, because it really has been a little bit of a very public journal for me. But because it's been such a safe space to share that, I don't really feel burdened by it either. It just makes me feel very lucky to have a community that supports and relates to those feelings. But that could change. We'll see.
Right. Okay. So what I want to jump into now is sort of tying a few of these strands together, really. And I think a good way to do this is I mentioned to you guys whether there was anything you wanted to discuss in particular during our conversation, and start with UK with the Stephen Fry quote, and then there's a little bit we can dig into there. If you have you got that at hand to hand, or do you want me to read it out?
Oh, I like your accent. I want you to read it.
Okay, so Stephen Fry. I don't know many people actually worth knowing who don't have a mind that sometimes leads them astray. You know, I don't know that sanity, real, sober, sensible sanity, is such a glorious thing. I think most of the world advances in creativity and invention, and in almost anything, have been done by little spurts of madness. Yeah, I happen to agree with that quote, but why? What about that stands out for you, and particularly as it pertains to what we're talking about today?
I am really fascinated by the idea of taking a negative and turning it into a positive. Part of me wonders if I like this quote because I want to believe it. um, because it's saying, having breakdowns, maybe you can turn that into real change. But it's true that I found that in my own life, having breakdowns led me to getting a diagnosis, starting my art blog, sharing my mental health journey with others. And so I just find that whether I don't know, I can say like, absolutely, I agree with this, that it's definitely true in my case. And I think it's kind of an interesting thing about other people that I have met who experience mental illness or high times of stress and like will go through a period of depression along with grief from losing a family member or something like that, that real positive things can come out of that sort of pain, I suppose.
Yeah, when you sent me that quote, I think the one I sent back that it reminded me of was the Tennessee Williams quote, which is, "If I got rid of my demons, I'd lose my angels." And the question that arises out of that is whether you guys think the trade-off has been worth it, and it could be specifically about art. I've sort of asked this question myself about just life in general, whether for some reason I can't bring myself to say that even though there was a time when I was pushed to, same as you, Kate, suicidal ideation for a little period there, and I've got kids
Right.
as well, and I was done with it. So, and there's a lot at stake there, but I still, in
Right.
hindsight, can't bring myself to say that I would have rather not gone through it because of
Right.
the sort of the things I've learned from it. And I mean, I don't know why. It's when I'm being honest, I can't bring myself to say it, and I don't know why I can't bring myself to say it. It seems stupid, but I'm interested in your perspective, from both of you guys, your perspective on that. Maybe in a general sense, whether you feel like all the shit you've been through, is it been worth it because of what you've learned about yourself and about life or whatever, but also specifically when it comes to art, like if what you've been through has been the sort of the fountain from which your creativity springs, would it be worth getting rid of that if you had to lose the creative aspects of yourself as well?
I mean, I thinking back to what you said earlier, where you said you didn't really understand anxiety or depression until you went through it yourself, and I think it makes you so empathetic to other people struggling. And so not only am I glad that like I think I can create art and understand the world in a certain way because of what I've been through. I think what I really love about it is that it makes me super empathetic and kind to other people because of what they're going through too, because I can relate and because I do recognize that it's this valid thing. Um, so that's kind of how I feel about it.
Kate?
I think it's very difficult for me to even think of what life would be without having experienced mental illness because it has been uh, quite a part of my existence for so long. So I actually I journal a bit, and one of the things that I have written down in the past is I do not like having anxiety. I do not like having these problems, but I honestly don't know who I would be if I didn't go through it. Um, and I think it's kind of natural to think, well, I'd be somebody very different, and then you feel sad because you wouldn't want to lose who you have become. Um, but as for, I don't know, the pain of suicidal ideation and panic attacks and those sorts of things, um, if it's worth going through that to have what I have now, I just think that um, I guess I just like to take the mentality that everything I've been through is it's just made me stronger. It's made me more capable of handling hard things. And that's one of the things that you do to fight anxiety is just looking at all of the things that you have survived before. So because I might be worried about something going on today, I'll remember oh, you went through that period of time where it was hard to get out of bed, but you still dragged yourself to school and you still dragged yourself to your job. And you got through that terrible month where you didn't have any motivation, but you managed to work through it anyway. So I don't know. I don't really know what to do with that question, honestly. I'm just happy with what I have. I'm happy to be here. I am happy to be creating what I am creating, and I'm very lucky to have the audience that I have.
Do both of you feel that the anxiety is something at this point? Is it something that you've sort of resigned yourself to? That from now on you feel like it's just something that's a part of you that you're just gonna have to learn to cope with in increasingly effective ways, or do you feel like it's something that you're going to be able to sort of actively put an end to at some point?
I think I've had to basically come to terms with that it's not really something that will go away, that it's daily management. And some days, Haley was talking about earlier, some days are really bad. But the more coping techniques that you learn work for you, the more good days you have overall. And the less the bad days actually knock you down, I have found in the last few years.
Yeah. And I don't know. I think once you realize that you're not alone in those feelings, I don't know. It just makes it so much easier.
It does. I agree.
Right. Well, I sort of steering us somewhere there, and that is I'm interested in what you guys actually do about this. You talk about coping with it, and I'm guessing according to especially like Haley's artwork, there's certain things to do to make things a bit easier, and so I'm interested in what you guys actually do to cope. Like, what are your coping techniques? What are your go-to pastimes apart from the art? Because art's not available to everyone. Art's not available to me. I'm rubbish. I'm rubbish at art. I've tried constantly over the years to sit down and have a bit of a scribble, and I've never got better than when I was about 8 years old. I'm still at 8-year-old artistic level. So like I say, it's not available to all of us. So what do you guys do? And I'm going to pick on you first, Haley,
Okay.
because the thing you sent me in the email was this. I think it was an excerpt from The Ghost of Corporate Future, Regina Spektor, who I'd not heard of before. Okay. So do you know do you know this, or do you want me to recite it for you?
Oh, you can recite it. I agree with Kate. You have the best voice here.
Okay. People are just people. They shouldn't make you nervous. The world's everlasting. It's coming and it's going. If you don't toss your plastic, the streets won't be so plastic. And if you kiss somebody, the both of you get practice. Why? So you said that quote reminds you not to take things so seriously. And so there's a few things in there that, if that's the main thing that stood out to you, this idea of not taking things so seriously, and why that matters to you and how you apply that. But I'm also interested in why that particular quote that elicits that.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm one of those people that feels like every bad thing is the end of my world. And so a quote like that, where it's reminding you that every person is just a person and that the world will continue on without you. And like something as scary as a kiss is just something that can be looked at as practice. That just made me, and I heard this song when I was in 10th grade for the first time. And I just remember it being this mind blowing moment of like, oh my gosh, that's right. Like we are all just the same and trying to make it through and, you know, survive and find happiness, whatever that looks like for each person. So it was really revolutionary for me, that song. And it's been something that like I kind of chant or like recite to myself when I'm anxious, especially in social situations, when I have to remind myself not to build other people up in my head or tell myself that I'm like alone and can't possibly, or can't, like no one else will understand what I'm going through. So that's kind of why I chose the quote. And remind me what the second part of that question was.
Yeah, well, I was why it was that this idea of taking things. I think you've kind of already answered it, but why the idea of not taking things so seriously is so sort of paramount for you.
I mean, I'm a nut. I really do believe that like every single thing is the end of the world. I get really anxious for, like Kate was saying, phone calls. I get anxious for parties and, you know, meeting new people and being vulnerable with my story. And so I think just remembering that everyone is kind of going through the same thing, even though all of our stories look really different. I don't know. It really spoke to me.
The thing that's sort of important to sort of realize here is, you know, like the artwork that you guys do helps a lot of people. They can relate to it. It cheers them up, puts a smile on their face, and that. But the other thing is that realizing that despite all the shit you're going through, that you can still make a success of yourself, and that and on the flip side of it as well, even when you are a success, that you're still gonna go through this kind of bullshit. And I think it's really important that people realize that, you know, I wonder whether they sort of maybe put you guys on a pedestal to an extent. I mean, I don't know, because you're very candid about your thoughts and your emotions, but I just think it's quite important to realize that, like you say, this idea of taking a negative and turning it into a positive, and that, yeah, that's 150,000 followers. I can't get over it.
There are a lot of anxious people out there.
Yeah, but that's it. But that's been achieved despite going through all the shit you're going through, which I think is really impressive. But yeah, Kate, over to you. What's your sort of go-to coping strategy or philosophy or whatever?
I really identified with what Haley said. One of the things that I really get into is like space things, like looking into astrophotography and things like that, because looking at the whole universe helps you feel really small. It helps put things in perspective, and it makes my brain that is going crazy about doom scenarios and about all these anxieties and making such a huge deal out of such small things. It helps really shrink that down and remember that we're just on this big rock hurtling through space and that all of this will end eventually, which for most people I think is like a terrifying thought, but for me I'm like, oh thank goodness.
Yeah,
Eventually all of this anxiety will stop.
yeah,
Eventually I won't deal with it.
I can relate to that in a weird way. I think it's a bit of a bittersweet one for me. I would say my go-to thing to snap myself out of it is I just think, look, you're going to be dead one day.
Right.
You know, these times.
I know, isn't it
Yeah.
weird? I feel weird admitting that, but it really helps me like get back into like being grateful for things and
It
being
does.
productive. I'm like, you only have so much time to make stuff, so have at it. And if it's bad, who cares? It doesn't matter
It
anyway.
does. On the flip side, though, I mean, again, I don't know if this is maybe something you guys would be past at this point, but for me, especially like I'm pushing 40 and what am I now, 36, 37? One of the two. I genuinely can't remember. I think I'm 36. After this feeling that like you tell yourself, you know, you're going to be dead one day. Chill out, relax, you know, go and
Yeah.
have a laugh. But at the same time, feeling like I haven't sort of done enough yet, and that I've got to that time's running out, and I've got to achieve something before
Right.
but then that has the flip side effect. You know, on the one hand, it's relaxing. It's like you're gonna be dead one day. Forget it. Chill out.
Yeah.
But then on the other side, it's like, oh shit, I'm gonna be dead one day.
Yeah.
And
There is another anxiety that like it just builds on top of itself. It's like, oh, I feel better, but here's the anxiety on top of that about now I have pressure to actually do things. Um, I think I don't know. I just want to I have it like motivate me, I suppose. I try not to think too hard about the fact that there's only a certain amount of time and time is the like most valuable currency we have or most valuable thing we have because it's limited. But I just take that as like you are going to be excited when you're an old lady and you look back on all the things that you did. You'll have like this body of work that you created. You'll have these relationships that mattered to you. And it's almost like looking through a scrapbook of your life. Like that's what I'm aiming for is like when I am old, they'll say, like, oh, I did the stuff that was important to me.
so, what's the goals now for you guys? Because again, you know, for someone who's sort of at the bottom of the hill, looking up at your popularity, I keep mentioning it, and you're like, you know, it is what it is. And
I
so,
mean, part of it is weird. Is like it wasn't ever a goal for me. I didn't like go out to build an audience. I didn't go out to like get a creative career. It just kind of like happened. I'm very fortunate that it happened. But to think about like take it to the next level, I'm like, I don't know. Just make stuff you like. And if other people like it, maybe they'll throw money at you and then you can make more stuff with the time that you have.
but okay, but I guess. Yeah, seriously now, I'm
Sorry.
wondering. I'm wondering if
I
when
feel like I'm throwing you off.
no, not at all. The thing I'm wondering is whether, and I'm hoping you're going to say yes to this, whether you are able to look at the size of the audience and feel proud of yourself and feel like, well, fucking hell, like I've achieved something here. Do you know what I mean? I was. Because everyone starts off with that first post, that first blog post, the first video on YouTube or whatever, and like you say, you don't know where it's going to go, and you sort of winging it a little bit, and you can't control whether people are sharing your content. But you know, I like to think the cream rises to the top, and you know, if the work's good enough, it'll eventually garner the audience it deserves. And I just like to think that, you know, regardless of how sort of humble you both being, that you can that you still get a sense of pride out of it and say, well, yeah, I've done something pretty awesome here.
I mean, for me, it's so funny. I remember when I hit like 1,000 followers on my Instagram, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is turning into something!" Like I could not believe it. And for some reason, as the numbers have gotten higher and higher, like it just it just doesn't matter as much. Like I mean, it obviously is great to have more people seeing it, but I don't know.
It doesn't register to your mind as important important as the first like milestones were in my
Yeah,
experience. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, the funny thing is, I think the reaction of other people is the most entertaining part. Like when people meet me, or when friends of mine will introduce me to other people, they'll be like, "She's Instagram famous." And I'm like, "Why is that what you have to lead with?" Like,
I have that same experience
yeah,
where people like they'll ask me what my Instagram is or something, and I'll tell them, and they'll be like, "You're famous," and they'll like talk to you differently, and I'm like, "No, no, don't, please
it's
don't."
really it's really nuts. And I mean, I my friends here even threw me a surprise party when I hit 100,000 followers.
Oh, that's so sweet.
So cute. But I was like, I mean, if this is what is going to get me like the opportunity to like spend time with my friends and celebrate the art I've created, awesome. But
Mhm.
it just means that you're reaching more people. That's the really cool part to me.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean, the new, you are famous in this new medium. You know,
Mhm.
Instagram and YouTube is sort of where it's at now. Sorry, Haley, I didn't give you a chance to answer that question about what's next for you moving forward with this.
It's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I've tried out a lot of different things. I do like commissioned work, and I have a merch shop that I sometimes update, but not often enough for sure. And I'm working on like some stuff. I would really like to write a book one day, and I would love for it to be about anxiety. But I think in terms of Instagram, I'm just gonna hope that the platform stays relevant and that remains a place that I can share art with people, and have a community that really matters to me. I mean, I don't know how else to answer that one. I really don't know. And maybe it's like goal setting. I think that's what I'm really learning about myself, is that I'm not the greatest like 5-year plan person. I'm more of like this is working now. I hope it continues.
Ooh, same. I
Yeah.
think I always assumed for me that was an anxiety thing. Like you can't latch too hard onto something in the
No.
future because then you'll be scared of losing it or something like that. So it's kind of like this week I know what my work schedule is and I'm going to do that, and then we'll take the next week when it comes, or else my
Amen,
mind goes
sister.
crazy.
Yep.
Right, folks. So I'm just sat editing this interview now, and I've just realised. So we're just about to jump into the quickfire questions portion of the conversation. Now, anyone that doesn't know, the quickfire questions are basically sort of bonus content that was on the end of the podcast. And what I used to do basically was you got the interview portion of the conversation, which was free, and that went out on the podcast. And then we did the quickfire questions, which was sort of premium content, bonus content, or whatever, that was only available to my supporters on Patreon. Now, in the time since having this conversation with Kate and Haley, partly as well as a direct result of having this conversation with these guys, I've decided to give up on the whole Patreon thing. So basically, I'm going to talk about this a bit more in a future episode at some point. But I'm sort of taking my foot off the gas with this podcast now and rolling it back a bit. And the first thing I'm rolling back is the sort of the business side of it, the trying to generate an income, turn it into a business, all that lot. It's a failed endeavor. It's not going to work. I've been doing the podcast 3 years now. I think I maxed out at like 23 supporters on Patreon, which, those 23 people, it sort of makes it all the more special that when nobody else was interested, they were interested enough to sort of keep the podcast afloat. But it's just, like I say, 3 years. If it's not happened by now, it's never going to happen. So I'm knocking it on the head, and I think from now on, I'm either gonna just sort of do the podcast on an ad hoc basis, like whenever it can be asked, or I'm just gonna sort of slowly wind it down to a finish. Maybe what episode are we on now? Maybe about 85, 86. I might try and do 100 episodes or something like that. I've not decided, but anyway, the point of all this, like I say, I'll go into more detail in a future episode. But the point of all this is, I've made the decision. So the bonus content from this particular episode isn't going to be available to my audience, sort of ironically enough. I'm not going to put it out on the podcast. It won't be available on the Patreon page. Where it will be available, because I said this was going to be the case to help these guys to the extent that I can, it will be available on Kate's Patreon page, which is patreon.com/thelatestkate. and it will also be, if we can get it to work, available on Hayley's Instagram stories. So her Instagram is Hayley Drew This, at Hayley Drew This, and it's Hayley, Haley. She's going to try and put it on her Instagram story, so, you know, go subscribe to her Instagram. What I'm going to do with it when I'm going to upload it, I'm thinking maybe I might take all the past quickfire questions and sort of cobble them together into a little compilation or something like that and put it out at a later date. But like I say, we're on a whenever I can be asked basis from now on. So, you know, it could be next week, it could be 6 months from now. I don't know. It won't be 6 months. It won't be that long. But anyway, so yeah, there you go. If that you want to get the bonus content, the quickfire questions from this episode, now it's the only place you're going to be able to get it with Kate's Patreon page. Sign up there. She's got a Patreon page that's actually worth signing up to, that's worth the money, and Hayley's Instagram. Anyway, let's jump back into it. We're going to jump into the quickfire questions, but before we do, if you guys would just like to take a moment each to plug away your pages, websites, any books, any projects, just anything you like, go crazy for a moment and plug away. Hayley, let's start with you.
Neither of us wants to go first.
Need prompting.
Okay, well, yeah, my name is Hayley. You can find me at Hayley Drew This on Instagram, which is, as Danny kindly spelled out before, Haley Drew This. And I do have a merch store, which is linked in the bio there. So I'll be very excited to see any new people. And yeah, it's really been great talking about this today.
Okay, Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate. I am the latest Kate everywhere on the internet except for Twitter. So I am on Instagram, Facebook, Tumblr, Redbubble, and Patreon as the latest Kate. And on Twitter, I am at TLKateArt. And I'd love to chat with you about mental health or whatever. So come stop in and say hi. I appreciate it.
Right, well, as always, I will include links in the show notes, and on this video one, the links will appear sort of on the screen to everyone's Patreons and Instagram and all that. So,
thank you.
Okay, like I say, you get the first question free, and then you have to fork out, I'm afraid, help me pay these ever-increasing internet bills. So it's just patreon.com/.
Blah 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 blah.
Okay, guys, first question. What's the best book you've ever read and why? And Hayley, go first.
Oh gosh. Okay, that's the worst question ever because I cannot. I will say.
How do you define the best?
Well, think about it this way: if you was getting shipped off to a desert island and you've got a chance to just grab one book, what's it going to be? Oh, you know what? I'll be. Especially, you seem to have a bit of an affinity with music, Hayley. So I'll let you have an album if you prefer. Would that be easier?
Oh my gosh, no.
No.
But I think a book, it would be Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. I think that's how you say his last name. Yeah.
Okay, why is that?
Oh, it's just so good. I mean, it's kind of an epic, a family epic. So I think if I was bringing it on a desert island, I would at least be entertained rereading it. But it's just one of the first books I ever read in my life that really made me think a lot about a perspective other than my own. I think I read it for the first time in high school, and it was also just one of the books that made me like love writing more and more and like just kind of think about other ways to explore how to tell a story. So
okay, Kate.
Yeah.
I would take Uprooted by Naomi Novik, and it's just pure escapism. It's a fantasy story about a girl that like is a witch, and there is, you know, battles and an evil forest, and it's just fun. I love it. I reread it like every 6 months or so. So Uprooted, you guys should check it out. You've read that?
I just read that. Yeah, it's my boyfriend's favorite book, and he was like,
"Oh, that's so sweet."
I read it. I was like, "Oh, this is really fun."
Yeah, it's an enjoyable time for sure.
Right, okay, guys. What negative experience has had the most positive effect on your life?
Whoa.
Look at those thinking faces.
Oh, I got one.